Hello, I'm Neal Romanek, editor of Feed Magazine, and this is Feed's low carbon, zero carbon roundtable. And we're going to talk with some media technology experts today to talk about sustainability in the media industry and specifically how to reduce the media supply chain's carbon footprint and how we can get it down to zero, or what does it mean if we do get it to zero? How does that affect how we do media? We have with us Brandon Cooper, who's the president of First Mile. Is it Technologies?
First Mile Technologies, yeah.
First Mile Technologies. Thanks, Brandon, who's joining us from Canada, and he's here as a guest of DeGero. We have Liam Hayter, who's senior solutions architect at NewTek. Ian McDonough, CEO of Blackbird, and Peter Sykes, who's strategic technology development manager at Sony. And just to kick the conversation off, it would be great to hear what you've been hearing from your customers. All of you work with a variety of broadcasters, technology partners, content creators, and it would be nice maybe to get a taste of what they've been saying to you about sustainability, how high it is on their agenda, moving to zero carbon, and what it is that they want from you, and what the conversations have been like, maybe amongst themselves and with other vendors. Peter, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So, we've been monitoring, conversations over a long period of time, and it's very clear that there is a big industry shift and a big industry focus on sustainability. And what we're hearing is that, media and entertainment companies and people who are operating in that space, they're really looking at sustainability and they're prioritizing, and they're trying to find out, what the impact of their operations are through their supply chains. And they're looking for increasing the amount of transparency and the sustainability credentials of everyone that they're working with to produce their content. And the conversations, they're wide ranging, and the actions are kind of centered around, what the industry is doing and what productions are doing to minimize their carbon emissions. So it's true to say there's a lot of discussion in the industry. There are a lot of industry bodies that are looking at this on behalf of their members, whether they're producers, media companies, technology vendors, etc. And it's a very, very intense conversation at the moment. So that's kind of what we're picking up from the conversations that we have, and also a lot of the online events that we're looking at and we're attending, and the discussions like this one today that we're having with you, Neal.
Great, Brandon. You're kind of coming at things very much from the production side, right? And
yeah, absolutely. I've been involved in supplying production with equipment for 25 years, and I think what we've seen, particularly here in Canada, is a real push towards sustainability. You see major rental houses. We had a VP of sustainability when I was working for William F. White years ago. One of the largest rental companies across Canada, Sim, who is providing cameras and generators, have electric power sources. You see across all parts of their business, all the technology vendors in Canada are really looking at this as an opportunity to contribute and to find ways to be able to help the industry at large scale back on their waste, on their energy usage, in a whole host of different ways. And you see productions themselves coming to vendors asking, because you see what they're doing as well, and the large amount of initiatives that they're taking in order to try to get to sort of net zero. So it's absolutely something that is a priority, and we're seeing huge support by the CMPA and organizations like that, producers associations, guilds, things of that nature, taking these things into consideration as well.
Great, Liam.
Yeah, I mean, for most of our customers, we're coming from a slightly different standpoint with AV over IP and work we've been doing there within NDI5. And I think now, especially over the last 18 months, I think a lot of our customers have realized, sort of the days of moving big, heavy broadcast equipment are kind of a little bit behind us now. I think we've also adapted to remote production like we're doing today, whether it's using video conferencing or shifting into distributed cloud models, and now also on-prem distribution. So we're seeing more and more demand about how can we enable our customers to link different remote sites or bring talent in without necessarily moving crews around, without moving the equipment. I think it's something that we've got a lot that we're responding to in a really positive way with that. And it's something that's definitely not going to go away in the short term as well. And just by not moving equipment so much, it is going to help lower people's carbon footprint through a number of different avenues.
Ian?
Good. I'm very pleased to hear from the panel that the conversations are happening. You know, you guys are probably all a bit bigger than we are at Blackbird, but the group of customers that we have and we talk to, I don't think it's high enough on their agenda yet. I think it's still a little bit of lip service, and it's still a bit of like, we'd love to do this, but I don't think it's really, you know, properly got underway yet as far as how they're really going to tackle it. You know, you're right, Liam. There is more remote production, but there's also a hell of a lot of video that's being shifted and moved around.
Yeah.
Like high-res video and 4K video. It's being moved around when it doesn't need to be. There's companies that are saying, yeah, we want to be net zero, and there's a bit of lexicon confusion, I think, because net zero is very different to carbon neutral. So I think carbon neutral is you go out there and you buy offsets and you use, you know, wind power sometimes, then, you know, we're all carbon neutral. It's all great, but actually that's not really, that's just passing the parcel to something else. And I think that for me, I think there's an opportunity for the industry to kind of come together, clarify what it is that they need to do, and then get on with it. Because I think there's a lot of confusion. You know, offsets have been one of those things that have been very confusing, not just for our industry, but for many. Quite controversial, and you know, and I think people think they've got away with it, but actually, I don't think it's high enough on the agenda yet. I think we need to push harder.
Thanks. So it's interesting you're talking about that net zero. Even, you know, that's been a discussion point lately, that, you know, net zero gets thrown around and it's become all net zero all the time. But that net part there kind of means somebody else is going to sort it out for me later on. So you know, but I think when a business is faced with like, no, unless you're in agriculture, you know, zero actually means zero, you know. So I wonder, like, what is the you know, what are the things that are really going to be able to push media businesses to actually make the necessary leaps and the necessary steps? Because I think, you know, all of us run into that thing of like, you know, I'm kind of willing to do what's easy. But at some point, there's going to have to be a jumping off point where really big changes are going to need to happen. And I think, you know, I think COVID, it seems like COVID has been a really good example of that thing of people going, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And then people being forced to do things like remote production and do things in different ways and going, oh, that's actually kind of good. Let's just kind of keep doing that. So is it, what is the thing that you think will really get people to really sort of make the big leap and the big changes that they need to make, rather than just kind of trying to make incremental changes in what actually needs to be something quite large?
It's difficult. There's no question it's difficult. I know, I mean, we see in our industry, it's nothing happens unless it's forced change. So it's, you know, I mean, we saw a tsunami have to happen before we moved off of physical format, tape-based recording to file-based recording, right? So we see a pandemic that pushed us into remote production. I know with the company I'm at, we're about introducing, you know, we're a connectivity company that works with Dejero to introduce ways of using connectivity to enhance your production. And it took the pandemic to get us there. Now it's a great place to jump off, but it's tough. I mean, I don't know if it's incentives or sanctions or just, you know, absolutely new rules that are going to have to be implemented. The question is by whom and, you know, all the rest, but it's forced change. I think really is the only thing that I see that really ever amounts to anything in the part of the business I'm in.
I think you're right. Absolutely. I think, you know, I just made the allusion to it in my opening remarks, is that I think people have to know what to do first. You know, it's good that there'll be fines or there'll be incentives or whatever else. I mean, I think at some point, you're right, forced change needs to happen. I think there is a kind of practical guide that needs to be issued first of all to say, look, what you really need to do is not move media around, or not send people, you know, a plane load of people to Japan or to Brazil. You know, you need to be doing, you know, this practical thing first of all. You can follow these practical steps, then, you know, then people can then adhere to them. But I think someone's got to decide those practical steps first of all, because there's still a bit of debate about what they might be.
I think we've got the technology. We actually got the components now we need to actually help reducing all these things. Can we go complete to zero? We're using computers and a lot of electricity, and, you know, move to cloud and virtualization. There are lots of great tools that can help reduce it, but there's been very little analysis on sort of the carbon footprint of your TV production, of what's a remote production versus an on-site one. There is some data out there, but so we really need some focus on that as an industry, and actually then to navigate what the best combination of these things are. We certainly have the building blocks, but
sorry, we did a bit of analysis actually. We put a report out in the spring called "Video Shouldn't Cost the Earth," and it was really analysing some on-premise editing workflows, and some cloud-based editing workflows, and then cloud native, which was Blackbird. And it was quite surprising. I mean, it's shifting that content around, you know, on shifting people around, as you say, Liam, you know, is very costly on a carbon point of view. And, you know, the cloud native solution was actually 91% more carbon efficient than an on-prem installation, based upon the workflow that we analysed, which was a 2-week sporting event. So it's quite a typical one, but it's.
I think that's part of it. There's such a wide range of workflows out there and production types. You know, we're doing some quite big broad strokes here, and I think we do have to sort of say, you know, like yourselves, post-production industry, okay, what's that going to cost? What does a live production look like? What does a whole event going to cost in terms of carbon? It's just, the work's not been done. We've had a long time to try and do this. People like yourselves, Ian, are starting to do that, which is amazing. But I think there needs to be a broader effort across the industry to start looking at this to make the right steps. I think there's definitely winning on behalf of the customers.
Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, I think there's a few other points to add to that as well. We're obviously operating Sony Professional as a supplier, product supplier, and a solutions and service supplier. And there's nothing like pressure from the end user to change behavior. So we know that a lot of media companies have sustainability very, very high on their agenda. So as a supplier, we have to take that on board, and that will, you know, determine to an extent our activities. And the other is awareness of, you know, as has been said a number of times, the awareness of where the problem lies. And one of the good resources that you know, your viewers could look at are the guidelines from Albert, which are looking at sustainability in production. And there's some quite good analysis on you know, carbon production based upon genre. So whether it's drama, whether it's an outside broadcast, whether it's international factual, and whereabouts in those production chains all the problem areas lie. And as has been said, I think Ian said it, and Liam picked up on it. Movement of equipment and movement of people is a huge impact, certainly in things like drama production and factual, especially if that's international. So I think, you know, a good starting point to keep two things in mind is, one, that there are guidelines that are coming out, that people are getting more visibility of where the issues are, but also pressure from a customer is always good to concentrate the mind of a supplier. And you know, we see that because of the priority. I think, you know, it's interesting that Digital Production Partnership are running a leaders briefing in a couple of weeks. And if we look back at last year's leaders briefing, where media companies were asked to identify their 3 strategic priorities, sustainability came up over and over again. So yeah, huge highlight in the industry. And we know that the media companies that we're supplying to, you know, it's key for them.
So what are some of those, you know, looking at, I mean, looking at the pandemic and lessons learned from that, what are some of the things that we could look forward to, or, you know, positive changes that can be made? You've maybe mentioned some of them, but, you know, that idea that, you know, we have to, as you've said, the media industry can be slow to change, and that we have to do things this way. This is the way we've always done them. What things can you think of that you could actually go in and say, no, actually stop doing that, because there's a much better way forward that is going to be, you know, lower carbon, but is actually it's going to be better for everybody. You know, it might be better for, you know, better for your crew, better for your bottom line, you know, better for efficiency.
We saw it. I mean, we saw it during the pandemic. That's the most interesting thing about this conversation, is that it's timely in a number of ways, but it was also a huge point of emphasis for people when they were sitting home thinking about things. Is, you know, suddenly, I mean, and look, this is just based on what we are doing as a company, but suddenly on a commercial set, when you would have maybe, I don't know, say 30 crew members, maybe more on your typical commercial set. And then you have 20 client agency people pile in as well on every single set, every single day. And a lot of those people are coming from out of town, out of country. And they're coming, they're flying, they're driving, they're consuming. When they are on set, they're there, they're consuming. They are, you know, they're traveling. Suddenly, those 20 people, client agency, are there virtually. We're streaming out from a set, and they're able to stay involved creatively and making approvals on projects that they're working on. And I don't know that it will necessarily have to stay that all of them don't come, but instead of 20, maybe you only have 2, maybe you only have 3. So we start reducing the number of bodies that are traveling. We start reducing the number of people consuming on a set, or we keep our crews to, you know, acceptable levels. Then we also started looking at the media, and we start saying, well, we're moving media around like we used to move film cans. You know, at the end of the day, like I would, you know, I would work 15 hours and take 20 cans of film to the lab and drop it in a slot. Now I'm doing the same thing with hard drives. You know, we're into the digital age. Why are we doing that? There's no need for that. I know for us, we're about to unveil a camera to cloud solution for proxies, instantaneous files going to post, you know, like Blackbird or something like that, right? So we're virtualizing a lot of the workflow. And so suddenly you start looking, well, all of a sudden like any one of these things isn't a deal breaker, isn't a major thing, but you start putting them together and you start saying, look, on every set, we're minimizing the number of people traveling, consuming, the number of cars, the number of vehicles in our fleet, maybe they're EV vehicles. Like there's so many different things to consider. There's so many different ways. And if everybody puts their drop in the bucket somehow, then all of a sudden you start seeing measurable success.
And the actual footprint of the technology is shrinking just by moving to software as well. So what used to be a large scale OB van, you know, we've got customers now building them out of minis or much smaller vehicles, much more efficient. They can meet the things like the ULEZ in London to get them around. It's just a small crate that slots in the back. And we've seen sports production done with this through to news broadcasts even before the pandemic. And then those customers we've had that have been building around a software sort of AV, sort of NDI mindset for our technology during the pandemic have gone from building, say, auditorium spaces that they got to very quickly turn inside out so they could reach their staff or their guest speakers using video conference, but still using their in-house AV. And now for us, because we're now going to be moving to actually expanding the network beyond the local building across public internet, instead of moving media, i.e. you record it on set and get the cards back, we can actually just pull that feed directly in live to the post facility, and the post facility could edit it, or they could have it there for archive without actually any content being shuffled, and we can do that real time. We've already been linking up sites between like my colleagues in Hungary and the US and starting to experiment with what those co-productions are going to look like. And in effect, you just send a cameraman with maybe a few PTZ cameras, or you know, it doesn't have to be a big, even be a van anymore at that point, which is going to be pretty liberating, I think.
Thinking about the really big entities, you know, that touch our sector, let's say, what do you think the roles of the public clouds might be? Because I mean, at the end of the day, they've all got their net zero targets in place for 2030 or whenever it's going to be. But you look at AWS and you look at GCP and you look at Azure. I mean, they're still selling power, storage, and bandwidth, right? That's what their models are. You know, how do you think they're going to cope with this, and how do you think they can help?
Well, they have to find ways to be able to make their businesses more efficient in that sense. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. Right now, the things that they sell are, I mean, it is what it is. But I mean, look, somebody at some point is going to have to put the hammer down too, and going to have to say, look, so much is shifting towards you. we already see how massive it is, and it's only going to get greater. I think the onus is going to be on them in order to be. I think, was it Amazon recently that had abandoned a large amount of their ideas of going, reducing their carbon footprint down to, I forget what the percentage was, but it was, it's become less of a priority for them, and it needs to become more. There's no question. I mean, these are the big things. It's like they're the new airline industry, in that sense, in terms of, carbon emissions and a responsibility. Who regulates that? That's a good question. But I think you do look at, so if you look at, say, the major Hollywood studios, all of them have massive initiatives in order to reduce everything from wastewater on their own studio sites to, going paperless with their crews and their call sheets, to donating food from their sets, and so there's less waste. So if they can do that, if the large studios can do that, then certainly the public cloud companies can do the same.
I think there's also a lot to be said for the distributed production. I think cloud, we all get quite sort of bogged down with cloud. It's like, we're all going to put it in data centers. Everything's going to live up there. And I think trying to track how that's powered and what the actual environmental impact of that's going to be very difficult. But if you work on premises and you distribute things, at least you know who's your electricity supplier, who's providing that energy to actually power the equipment at your main location, right? Who's then powering the little satellite hubs that then connect to that? At least you can then, as a business, maybe actually start having some control over that and still use cloud where it makes sense. But I think just depositing everything into these big cloud companies, without getting all the data out the back about what they're doing, is going to make that part of that challenge. I think it's got to be a combination there. But then, each business has then got to take ownership for that and making sure they are using renewable energy wherever possible.
Yeah, there was a great piece of work done over the past 6 months that we were invited to participate in, along with lots of other organisations, which was again a piece of DPP work looking at working live and remote. And the working group identified, I think, 5 different types of remote distributed production, really starting from, the traditional situation where all the acquisition, the processing and the control equipment are on the same site, on the location, using, tried and trusted workflows that could be applied to, lots of different types of sporting event, for example, including, the very highest profile, and then looking at how that could be maybe split. So first point would be remote production, where the acquisition and the processing equipment remains on site, but the control is remoted, and we've seen some really good examples of that being used throughout the live production industry. And then we have examples where the processing equipment and the control surfaces are centralized, and you just have the link from the cameras on site, all the way through to cloud, where the processing is done in the cloud, the acquisition equipment is still on site, and then the control can be from anywhere. It can be from central headquarters, or it can be from home. And at each stage, you have benefits in terms of reducing people that are traveling, and that leads on to reducing environmental impact. And it was a very good piece of work. If anybody's interested in that, they can look at it on the DPP site. Ourselves and our colleagues from Nevion took part, and it was quite an in-depth piece of research, which we found quite useful, and we use the findings in a lot of our internal operations. And there's an increase as well in virtual production, the LED screens that are in a central film studio somewhere, and game engine technology is used to feed the screens. They're mapped to the camera movement, so the backgrounds track what the cameras are doing. The actors can see the set that they're working in, and again removing the need for people to travel around, which that could be a substantial cost in terms of a production.
Also, environmental impact on locations. Often sets are like a traveling circus. They roll into a city, town, location, and it can wreak havoc on the habitat there. It depends on where you're at. We see it all the time. Not every show is downtown in the middle of a thriving city. Oftentimes they're in woodlands, quarries, different places that naturally are fairly fragile. So all of a sudden you start shifting to more virtual production. There is the question about power, but with LED technology, it certainly helps. A lot of this is also about open minds. I think it's taking technology and using it to your advantage, not just to increase the efficiency of your workflow, but to be environmentally more sound. It takes a producer, it takes a head of production that has an open mind, that can see these sort of things, that moves away from the traditional way of doing things just because this is the way it's done. It's going to need people like that in order to foster and sort of push this, things into a new way of considering, and a new way of setting up your production, a new way of executing, regardless of the size. So that's equally as important. We can have all the mechanisms in place that we need in order to be able to do it, but it takes a producer with an open mind to be able to embrace it and then make sure that their productions follow.
And I would think it has to be better, right? It's got to be, you have to offer me something better, or it's going to be a hard sell. I mean, yeah, I guess not dying in a horrible apocalyptic way that's fine, but people also in the short term need to be sold on, like, what is the benefit, even if it's a financial benefit or if it's going to make things easier. So I think that seems to be a thing, like, what is the incentive for people in the short term?
Yeah. I think there's a big part of this is being knocked on as well from audience expectations too. I mean, part of the reason we have moved all this kit around over the years, it can make the very best quality broadcast content there could be. And it's like, what's come out the last 18 months is what is good enough for a particular type of show? What is good enough for the news? What is good enough for a news bureau? And I think maybe we kind of spent so long going for the finest, best quality imagery you can, which has a cost. And now it's like, okay, well, how can we do that in this kind of remote world that we're doing? Mm-hmm. How can we raise the quality of this now to that level without going back to moving kit around and all that expense and fuel costs and everything else that goes with it? But I think now audiences have adjusted what they do, and we've got to stop looking at maybe thinking audiences are watching on giant screens all the time, and they'll be looking on phones or tablets or their laptop. Do we need 8K? Do we need 16K and the power that's required to actually make that work? Okay, where do we start making economies in those processes to actually start delivering those to meet that audience expectation?
And then does that change? I mean, you're talking about the idea of the traveling circus coming in and wrecking a local area, but if you use somebody from that local area to maybe manage a production or shoot something, or you have somebody maybe who can work within that local region and knows what's going on there, which then maybe decentralizes everything. So you have, rather than expertise, all the expertise is in New York or all the expertise is in London, you end up being able to need expertise in a lot of different places, which would seem to be a very different way of looking at it.
And expanding the connectivity to make that happen between these different geographies and sites. We've still got, we were talking earlier about moving files around and data, or whether we're streaming content in our case. Are we going to make sure we've got the connectivity in place in all these places to make these productions happen? Or is it just going to suffer because you can't get the content back and forth if you do work in that sort of model? So
that's what we do.
Needs to be done there. Yeah. Oh yeah, but it's the actual network of just the pure internet speed to the connectivity. That's where it starts breaking up a little bit.
Absolutely. That's absolutely key. But the best part about it is the answer is yes, we can do it. You know it. We do it, and we've been doing it over the past year and a half. DeGero's been doing it for the past 10. And I think, and there's a whole host of other companies, of course, that have been contributing to that. And we're getting to the point where, we can use local expertise, and the expertise we have that isn't local, we can bring in. And it doesn't necessarily mean bringing in physically all the time. We can do it. We can send video, we can send files, we can bring really high levels of connectivity, with aggregated cellular and satellite. We use modems, we use NewTek modems in places like that. And this is the type of thing though that we can do. I mean, we already can do it. It's just a matter of continuing to develop these things, continuing to refine them, and then having people continue to accept them after the scourge of COVID has long since passed.
Isn't that one of the biggest things we could do though globally, is actually ensure the connectivity is in place? I know it's still, we know it's possible and we know we're doing it, but it's not global. And this is the whole thing, is we're still looking in the little locations, but the locations that we're based in, the facilities are at. You know, in London, I've got fibre, but there's still people in England that can't even get 100 meg.
Yeah.
How are you going to do remote production there? How are we going to get people in South Africa communicating and telling their stories and communicating outwards, or anywhere in the world? We've got to do a big effort, because that, if we can get that connectivity piece right globally, then that's immediately going to make a lot of these challenges much easier for everyone. Full stop. We've got the parts, as you say, Brandon, but we're not totally there yet, I don't think.
We're pretty close.
We're close, but we're not close enough yet. We need just a little bit more work done.
We're pretty close. When we start looking at Leo and things of that nature, it's incredibly exciting. There's still, don't get me wrong, it's not like tomorrow, but
we don't want to be putting more satellites up in the air either. I don't think that's the other thing. I think it needs to be more ground level, but this is part of the challenge we've got to address, right? Because that's just more jet fuel, and that's just more carbon. And we're like, okay.
There's technology around that will work on very low bandwidth as well. So our technology will work on 2 megabits. So it doesn't need to have a fiber connection to that. But to your point, I think you made about 2 points ago, Neil, about trying to sell the producer on something and saying it can't just be you can't just wear a halo, but also you want to get a better experience. And a lot of these again, refer to us, but a lot of technology out there now can offer something better. They can offer things that are more efficient, not just from a carbon and power perspective, but they can be efficient from a time perspective. Yeah. They can be very efficient from a cost perspective. They can be efficient from an access perspective. So it's that Elon Musk phrase. I'm sorry, I'll be the first person to put an Elon Musk quote into this one. It's like we're not looking for a better electric car. We're looking for a better car. And I think that's the point. You are looking for a better experience all around, and sustainability and power. It's great to build that into it, but I think we should build it around efficiency and that user experience. And if you build around efficiency, then generally the sustainability will be a part of that. So,
and is that also building? Is it can you do a 4-day-a-week production instead of a 5-day week? I mean, that would seem crazy. Why would you do 4 days a week instead of 5 for a production? But when you start thinking in those ways, does it start to push you to consider things you might not have considered before?
Yeah, I think the pandemic was a good example. I know it's been mentioned previously, but the requirement to act immediately, not rolling out projects in months, but having to react in days or hours was a great example where when the requirement is there, companies can move relatively quickly. And we saw media organizations advance their technology roadmaps by anything from 6 months to some were saying they brought it forward by 2 or 3 years, doing things that were on the roadmap. They had it planned. They didn't have it planned for next week. They had it planned for maybe 18 months down the line, but it was accelerated. And speaking personally from Sony point of view, we were all sent home on day one, and we were working remotely. And after the initial setup of all the networking, we were working very efficiently. And it wouldn't have happened if the external stimulus hadn't have been there. And in this the conversation that we're having at the moment, the industry is watching. There is a great Committed to Sustainability program, which again is being run by DPP, which is looking at the credentials of suppliers into the industry, whether they're technology suppliers or whether they're production suppliers, etc. And they're open to membership. Members can join, and there's a fairly rigorous investigation into the practice within an organization. Whether you're producing products, they're looking for greenhouse gas emissions and waste and water, as I think has been said before. So when the will is there and there is a requirement, that you can move relatively quickly.
So and I don't know if it's taking a darker turn, but it's certainly a more somber part of the discussion. We know that a lot of scientists say that 2 degrees is we'll be lucky if we get to 2 degrees. That 2 degrees is almost certainly locked in, and we may be even locked in at higher. We may be locked in at 3 and 4 degrees, which is is terrifying. 1.5 is terrifying. 2 degrees is terrifying. But we are going to be looking at, like it or not, over if it's the next decade, 2 decades, 30 years, 50 years, more and more challenges because of climate change that are just a matter of infrastructure, stability, weather events. And I wondered what thoughts you have about how media companies, broadcasters, communicators need to prepare for that, and maybe even adjust to start with, even adjust the practical technological sense. Like we're talking about the idea of having distributed technologies, but if a lot of those are becoming more fragile, as we build them, it seems we could be on a treadmill with that. When you build something and then it gets destroyed. So there are, there, like it or not, there are big challenges coming up, and wondered what you might have to say about how people should think about those and prepare for those.
I'll jump in now on that one. I think speed is of the essence. Speed is, it's no good just sitting around talking and contemplating and cogitating over number of years about what we're all going to do. It's you need to utilize the technology that exists in front of you and roll it out widely. We've heard a couple of times today about moving people around and how that's important. Moving media around, moving high-res media around the internet is extremely heavy on power, extremely heavy on carbon, and yet it's being done. Some of it has to move, sure, when it's published, but a lot of it is being moved unnecessarily to and fro, backward and forward between producers and editors and various parts of the media supply chain, which is just doesn't need to happen when there is the technology around today. Brandon's talked about it with Dejero. We can talk about it with Blackbird. That doesn't have that drain. That doesn't have that issue, and can be done at a tiny fraction of the carbon and power cost. So I think really it's about getting technology that exists rolled out very, very widely, and for people to understand what that technology is, so that they can act. I am terrified about the next 10, 15 years. I really am. And I think that we can, if we act together and we act smartly and don't just sit here and can pontificate for years, something can be done. I'm optimistic about that, but I think we need to act.
Ian, you're talking about like a proxy first workflow rather than originals and all the rest. Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, I mean, you look with $250,000 to $750,000 per day lost for every production because of weather. And then you start moving into what we could have in terms of just a lot more radical changing weather and things of that nature, affecting productions everywhere, affecting travel. It's scary. There's no question about it. And I totally agree with Ian. I think, using what's in front of you, trying to make sure that you are efficient and you're doing things not just because you can do them, but are they intelligent to do? I think this is a big thing. So much of the onus becomes on the individual. And once again, having open-minded people being able to really consider the results of their actions, and when there's so many different singular things happening on a production, they add up pretty quick. And so it's, there are things like biodiesel generators, electric generators, just LED lighting in itself, and just how much of a huge savings in efficiencies and cost that LED lighting has just totally transformed the industry and will continue to. The virtual production, like we were talking about earlier, Peter had mentioned, that's another thing. I mean, why have to take a whole unit to, somewhere in the desert when potentially you can shoot it indoors in a controlled environment, and people don't have to travel. So there's so many different ways we can do it. There's no question, like it is a little bit scary. I think, Neal mentioned it, just a couple degrees, and it's happening. We're seeing it all over the place. It's scary.
We saw on the live broadcast end, some of our customers may have been considering some of the uncompressed IP protocols early on versus our NDI protocol, and just looking at the running cost of an uncompressed network stack versus using efficient compression. Just as you guys are talking about a proxy worst workflow for, say, post, we're talking exactly the same thing for live product. Well, not even a proxy for live, it's just very, very efficiently compressed. But again, that has intrinsic data savings and cost savings and power savings, whether it's cloud, on-prem, or anywhere in between, to deliver everything we've been talking about here as well, just for the live content of the business. That's really where we're more focused on that live end. It just sort of, it does add up and speak for itself. But I agree with you guys. I think that all the building blocks for all aspects of media production are here now for us to help start drastically reducing this. And I hoped, maybe after the pandemic, that maybe things would stay that way quite quickly. But I'm already getting requests from people saying, "Hey, can you do this for travel?" I was like, "I can do this remotely now. I don't need to do that." Like, if we all start doing that, we all start making those changes now, then I think that's the only way forward. We have to move fast, and I agree with you totally on that.
I think it's also incumbent upon suppliers into the industry to communicate as well what they're doing, so that their customers have have visibility of that, because we know that the customers are analysing very carefully all aspects of their supply chain, and there's a lot of services that get sold. There's a lot of products as well. A lot of cameras are being sold, and monitors, and audio consoles, and laptops, and things like that. So for us, we have make a big effort to communicate what our activities are. There's an annual report which is published, which is it runs to almost 200 pages, looking at Sony's worldwide organization and how the factories are running, and how greenhouse gas emissions are being reduced, and how renewable energy is being rolled in across the organization. So I think there's that aspect as well for the communication from the supplier side.
And I guess the customers knowing what's possible, because they might be thinking, well, this is the best way I can think of doing it, but you may have technologies that you're thinking of a couple years ahead that they might be available to solve their problems, I'm assuming.
But it's also why we're here. I mean, this is also why this discussion is important. We're all busy people, and we all have things to do. But when I heard about this, it stopped me to say, hey, this is a really important discussion to have. It's important for us to talk about it as a group. It's important to let people know the different things that all of us are doing in order to counteract this, and I think, whether it's annual reports, whether it's, roundtables like this or whatever it might be, it's important to let people know that there are other ways to do things, and that it wasn't just a pandemic measure. These things were, like we said it before, these things were happening. These things were happening in the background. Look, when I started this company, I haven't been around very long, so it's only been 2 years. But when I started, it was having a 2 to 3 year roadmap of taking this technology and introducing it to the film and media production world. And then all of a sudden, about 6 months in, the pandemic happened, and then all of a sudden it went from 2 years to 3 months. We hustled, and we rolled it out. We've listened to people as we've gone. We've seen efficiencies. We've seen how things can be done, a lot better than the way they were before. And to go back to the way we were doing the production world was doing things before is just crazy. It just doesn't make sense. We had opportunities with a reshoot in Winnipeg, where an actress was in Winnipeg. They needed a reshoot with her for a show that had been done in Canada the year before. The DP was in New York, the director was in LA, the producers were in Toronto, and we were able to help, reshoot the scenes with everybody involved, and nobody had to move. You would have had multiple people, half a dozen or more people coming in by plane for 1 day of shooting. Okay, so it's a small example. Why would we go back to doing that now? It doesn't make any sense at all. And we need to continue to let people know that, look, this is a great way of working. And the further we go with it, the more we iron out any kind of wrinkles that come up. So
I think that's a question. Like, I'm just going to say, like, how do you end up building on that? Because it can be like sort of one thing, like, oh, that worked out really well. But then how do you sort of say to people that this is actually a thing? We can do this thing that we did.
Well, things like this, Yeah. I know for us anyways, it's continued promotion of these sort of things. It's getting the tools into people's hands and say, try it, parallel workflow, try it on this job, and let me know how it works. It's also continuing to innovate. We're not stopping with just moving video and doing video feeds. We're also, like I said, we're looking at creating proxies real time as the camera makes it and sending it to the cloud and showing the people who are already using us for just simply video feeds saying, hey, we can also move your proxies. You know, we continue to innovate. Sony, there's no question. I'm excited to see what Sony does and starts pushing out of the pandemic. I mean, it's incredible. I see what Blackbird is doing. I mean, it's incredible what they've managed to do, and the fact that coming out of this pandemic, the tools are just even more powerful because we've also got way more insight in talking to people. Before, you would have to like literally, you know, barge into their office or chain them to a chair to listen to you. All of a sudden, for a year and a half, they were willing to listen. And so now all of a sudden we've got all sorts of great feedback. And then we come back at the industry saying, okay, well, we heard what you had to say. You're using the base product that we have now, but look what we've done. We've listened to you. We've made it even better. I mean, I've seen firsthand, just from people I know working with Blackbird and seeing the things that they were doing before comparatively to what they are now. It's incredible. So, you know, you have to innovate. You can't just stand there, pat yourself in the back and hope that everybody notices. You have to be out there. You have to be an advocate for it.
What about these sort of, maybe talking to you, Peter, but I mean, everybody, you know, you have these sort of big events, and I guess all of you have probably been involved in these big events in some ways, but, you know, you've got your World Cup or your Olympics or your, you know, big old giant live events that, you know, need to be done perfectly. You know, there's no room for error, and there's lots of stuff brought in to make sure that happens. And I'm sure like the size of one of those events kind of eats up the carbon budget of loads and loads of other little tiny productions. So I wonder, what is there, you know, can those be scaled down, or can those be rethought in different ways?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because, you know, when you're operating at the very, very high end, you know, the 2 or 3 global sporting events, which are, you know, they just cannot fail, basically, then, you know, you do have to be very, very careful before you throw all your eggs out, you know, throw everything out and start all over again with something that, you know, may be untrusted. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that there was a huge event that was run this year, which did have to be done remotely. Mm-hmm. And if you look at what has happened over the past 18 months, you look at some of the research that comes out of IABM, and they look at technology trends and what drives people really to invest in products and services. You know, we saw a huge increase in demand for remote and cloud workflows, and, you know, increases in the use of IP. So I think when you have these cannot fail events, it's you have to be a little bit more careful, because, you know, if you lose a minute of the ultimate football tournament, then you make the main news around the world. So you have to be a little bit more careful there, and that's where the balance comes in. But yeah, the technology, as has been said, for, you know, collaboration between production teams around the world. We see it in sport, we see it in, you know, especially as well in news, with what's happening in newsrooms, you know, cloud-based global news operations, where you know, journalists who were out in the field with their cameras and maybe we're having to do a lot of the editing themselves, can shoot the pictures and send those back for the production team somewhere else in the world to work on. That removes a lot of pressure from them. They can concentrate on the story, you know, rather than concentrate on all the, you know, the routine tasks, which is not a good use of their time. So I think it's a case by case basis. At the very, very top end, you do need to be careful, but we've seen, you know, effective use of IP and you know, increasing use in cloud. But there are workflows which do remain, you know, quite traditional. Maybe the control surfaces, as we said, have been remoted, and the cameras and some of the processing equipment is still at the stadium. So, you know, everybody's on this journey, as we say, and it'll be fascinating to see how it pans out over the years.
Ian,
we were trialed actually in one of these big events over the summer. I'm not allowed to say which one, because there's lots of big sponsors involved that claim that they're involved as well. So, but one of these big events of the summer we were involved in, and it was, you know, as you say, Peter, it needs to be tested first, needs to be tested thoroughly first. So it was a successful trial, which is great. And when it comes around to another one that's going to happen next year, then will be used as a hub for post, not for live, but for post, for rights holders around the world to be able to access Blackbird as a hub to pull each one of those clips and events that needs to be accessed, for each corresponding country, without everyone having to travel to that particular location and do it. So yeah, you're right. Some things do have to be in the stadiums, of course, and in the events. But if you can stop as many people actually having to physically be there, ruining the landscape and having to travel and the carbon that goes with the air travel, the better. So you're right, Brandon. We have come on leaps and bounds, and this putting Blackbird as a hub now for a global sporting event for all those rights holders to be able to access is a huge step forward, and I think very, very sustainable and efficient in the pocket as well.
Incredible. It's incredible. And Liam can talk more about it. He knows more certainly about NDI than probably a lot of us do. But I know that last year's NFL draft was done all via NDI. It was the backbone for the entire thing. This is an event where normally there's, hundreds, if not thousands of people in attendance. And in terms of production, just there's a lot of people there. And suddenly NDI, there we go. All of it, a fantastic backbone to be able to connect people from all over the place.
Yeah, we're starting to see that more. We've got more stadiums coming online now that are starting to use NDI because they don't all necessarily have the major league matches, but they still want to stream and broadcast to their fans. But if you can then connect that kit to existing broadcast equipment where it's needed, that starts becoming quite an interesting model. And it's not sports related, but when we did Supreme Court UK and Ireland a couple of years ago for the prorogation cases, they wired it all up themselves with NDI and using our production systems in the building. So it's cost effective, but it meant they could enable video where they couldn't before. But then when the broadcasters needed to receive it, some of them took the live stream. We had it on every major news outlet. We had some of the OB vans connecting up and then just taking an SDI feed out, but nothing got taken in or out of the building. They just used what was there. And we're seeing that same model apply to stadiums. We've done it for music concerts in the pandemic, orchestras distributed across multiple rooms where we couldn't before. And that's before we even start joining these sites remotely as well, and then start moving NDI without even less kit movement again as well. So, I mean, it's opening up in a pretty big way. And it's just now we've got to start, how do we all interoperate between these different workflows as well, between us all. So,
okay. So we're kind of coming up, I think, on time here, but sort of one closing question for each of you. What would be the one thing you would tell a company to do if they wanted to lower their carbon footprint? If they could say, they came up to you and they're like, what's one thing that we could do, like, immediately? What would you suggest? Anybody want to jump in?
We've
Peter?
really converged on this reduction of travel and looking very closely at where all the inefficiencies lie. I think there's unanimous agreement on that across the pieces broken out on the panel on that one, I think. Then the other one would be, I guess, if you're you asked for one, but I'm going to give you two really. The other is to look at, especially on the supply side, the efforts that have been made to address environmental concerns in terms of production of products and delivery of services. So I think the interesting thing to point out there is that nobody has the 100% answer as we're sitting here today. I'm working within Sony and I see, the reports of what we're doing on a corporate level. And we have a program that we're calling Road to Zero, where we're aiming for zero environmental footprint by 2050. And that sounds it's in the distance, but within that, there are milestones, every few years there's a milestone really, to improve towards that final target. So whether that's reducing greenhouse gases or bringing in 100% renewable energy earlier than the date of 2050, it's worth looking at the activities that the companies that you're purchasing services and products from, just to see what they're doing. So those would be two things, but I'm sure we're going to have a lot more that we can talk about as well.
I think you've got to have an open mind. I think you've got to really be open to looking at the way your people work, your processes, and find a way to review them so you can put up more sustainable methods up against the ones you currently use, and then make the choice. Once again, I think we've pointed out ad nauseum that there are tools already out here to help you. And it goes from going paperless to maybe only having red meat on your lunch plate twice a week or once a week. Your wastewater, what you do with plastic bottles on set. There's so many different ways. Why not look at everything you do before you run into a production and start looking at ways you can change that, even if they hurt a little bit because they're new, are a little bit more responsible.
Liam?
Yeah, sorry. So no, sorry, release my train of thought. Sorry. But yeah, it's definitely very much the travel thing. I think we've done ad nauseum, but I think not just people, it's the kit. And that's the other thing we've got to be clever about how we do that. And that's why I really think the distributed production model, that this is really kind of the way things should be. It's not, that opens up so many different doors for reducing this automatically. So it's that, and also a move to software as well. We don't use enough commercial off-the-shelf hardware. Everybody's got cameras in their mobile devices. We've all got tablets. Everybody's got laptops. People in this can keep buying more and more equipment. It's like, how can we use what we've already got more intelligently as well, at the same time as those production tools? And I think personally, over what we've done over the last 18 months, I think if we start rolling backwards, like I've started to see, some other sectors, I think for the media production industry to sort of almost like move on from this methodology we've been doing in the last 18 months about what is good enough, where do we need to do remote contribution, how do we keep using video conferencing for these types of things, I think it'd be a great shame. I think we can actually build on this and improve the quality of it further, improve the production efficiencies further very, very quickly if we just keep iterating like we have. Because it's actually been despite the horrors of the last 18 months, how the media industry has responded has actually been really amazing to see, to be honest. We can do it.
As an industry, I think we should just keep honing these solutions for the customers. I would say, yes, I agree with Peter about not moving people around. That's absolutely a given, and we are unanimous on that. I would say also don't move heavy duty, high res 4K HD content around if you don't need to. There's that adage that if you want to move a high res piece of video from LA to New York, it's cheaper to put it in someone's luggage and send them by plane. Because it uses less power, less carbon, and less time. So if you're going to move all that stuff around all the time, then it needs to be when it really needs to move. So without wanting to finish on a plug, I would say use Blackbird.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Brandon, Peter, Liam, Ian, and really look forward to hearing what the industry response is to this roundtable, and hopefully we can make some progress. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, Neal.